Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the world around you is not only louder, faster, and more saturated with information than ever before, but also strangely numb, almost anesthetized to reflection. People speak, react, and share without pause, as if their minds have been conditioned to bypass the uncomfortable work of thought. Carl Jung would say that what we are witnessing is the rise of a collective shadow, a manifestation of the unconscious mind projected outward, where the unexamined impulses, fears, and prejudices of the individual are magnified and mirrored across society. In this space, critical thinking, the deliberate engagement with ideas, the reflective confrontation of reality, is no longer cultivated but quietly extinguished. Pause and consider this. A society where thinking deeply is rare is a society in peril. The human mind, once a tool of inquiry and discernment, has been habituated to passivity. Opinions are consumed as commodities, reactions are instantaneous, and the comforting illusion of certainty replaces the difficult work of introspection. This is not mere happenstance, it is a psychological and cultural phenomenon. When we surrender our capacity for thought, we are surrendering our individuality to the collective unconscious, allowing the projections of the unexamined mass to dictate what is perceived as true, acceptable, or necessary. Why has this happened? The causes are manifold, but central to the crisis is the abdication of responsibility for one's inner life. Jung warned that the most dangerous forms of human behavior arise not from conscious malice, but from the unacknowledged contents of the psyche. When individuals refuse to face their own fears, desires, and contradictions, they project them onto others, onto leaders, onto narratives, and onto culture itself. Thus, the digital age, a realm of infinite distraction and constant validation, provides fertile ground for this shadow to flourish. Every click, every like, every fleeting emotion becomes a mirror, reflecting not reason but unexamined impulses, multiplying them across millions of minds. This is compounded by what Jung called the inflation of the ego, a defense against the uncomfortable truths lurking in the unconscious. In a world obsessed with certainty, confidence, and identity, the ego fears dissolution, fears questioning, fears introspection. Thinking critically demands that we confront not only external lies and manipulations, but also the illusions within ourselves, the biases, the projections, and the unintegrated aspects of our character. It requires the courage to acknowledge that our beliefs are often shaped by the unconscious forces of the society we inhabit, not by deliberate reasoning. Educational systems, the media, and even social rituals contribute to this drift. From childhood, we are trained to obey patterns, to conform, to avoid the complexity of true reflection. Memorization is rewarded over insight, conformity over curiosity. Jung would see this as the systematic encouragement of collective identification, with persona, the social mask, at the expense of individuation, the process through which the psyche becomes whole. The individual who never confronts this process is left vulnerable to projection, compelled to see others as the source of their discomfort, rather than exploring the shadow within themselves. Information overload exacerbates this problem. Neuroscience tells us that our brains were not designed to process the avalanche of stimuli that confronts us daily. We skim, we jump, we react. Sustained attention is rare. Jung understood that reflection, contemplation, and the confrontation with the shadow are slow, often uncomfortable processes. The mind must be cultivated like a garden. Distraction is the weed that overtakes it, When we replace inner dialogue with passive consumption, when we allow our attention to be hijacked, we abdicate the very faculties that allow us to perceive. Truth beyond the superficial. Consider social media, a perfect reflection of the collective unconscious in action. Every algorithmic nudge, every emotionally charged post, every viral story encourages conformity of thought, the projection of fear, desire, or resentment onto the crowd. We mistake consensus for reality, virality for validity. The echo chambers. We inhabit a Jungian shadows externalized. The parts of ourselves we refuse to face, collectively dramatized, shared, and amplified. In this environment, dissent feels dangerous, reflection feels slow, and the slow, arduous work of individuation becomes not merely neglected, but actively discouraged. Yet, the danger is not merely societal, it is personal. The avoidance of thought is an avoidance of self. Every unexamined belief, every unquestioned impulse, every passive acceptance of narratives is a surrender of autonomy. Jung wrote that until one confronts the shadow within, one remains a pawn to forces both internal and external. To ignore the cultivation of critical thinking is to surrender to the unconscious currents swirling beneath the surface of awareness, currents that manipulate perception, behavior, and even morality. This is where the journey begins, by cultivating awareness, by confronting not just the misinformation or manipulations outside ourselves, but the projections and illusions within. Every moment of honest reflection, every pause to ask, why do I believe this? What part of me resists the truth? Is a step toward individuation. It is the reclamation of mental sovereignty, the conscious engagement with a reality that is often uncomfortable, sometimes frightening, but always liberating. To think critically is to honor the mind's true purpose, not to conform, not to react, not to perform, but to perceive, to reflect, and ultimately to integrate. And so the invitation is clear. Choose to face the uncomfortable truths, both within and without. Pause in the storm of instant reaction. Question not only what you are told, but what you believe, what you fear, what you suppress. For in this act, the deliberate, courageous act of thought, you resist the pull of collective projection, you illuminate the shadows, and you reclaim the essence of your individuality. This is the first step in awakening the mind, a step that may seem small in the moment, but is monumental in its impact. Each question asked, each reflection embraced, each projection recognized is a rebellion against passivity and a return to conscious life. Stay with this awareness, because in the next segment, we will explore not only why even the most intelligent minds fall prey to these forces, but how to navigate the labyrinth of unconscious biases and collective illusions. The path is neither easy nor comfortable, but it is the only path toward true freedom, clarity, and the deep satisfaction of a mind that thinks not merely because it can, but because it chooses to. As we move forward from the realization of our collective passivity, the next step is not despair but action, not resignation but engagement. Carl Jung emphasized that the path to true awareness and mental sovereignty begins with individuation, the conscious effort to integrate the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. This process is not merely psychological, it is deeply spiritual. To reclaim critical thinking, we must confront the shadows we have long ignored, for it is within these hidden parts of ourselves that illusions, biases, and unexamined fears take root. The first practice is reflection, the deliberate pause to examine thoughts and emotions without judgment. In a world dominated by speed, reaction, and distraction, reflection is revolutionary. Ask yourself daily, which of my opinions are genuinely mine, and which are projections, absorbed from culture, peers, or media? Which fears, prejudices, or desires are shaping my perception without my conscious consent? This metacognitive habit, the act of thinking about one's own thinking, illuminates the unseen forces that shape behavior and opens the door to intellectual autonomy. Equally important is the confrontation with the shadow. Jung described the shadow as the repository of all the traits we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves: anger, envy, arrogance, fear, and vulnerability. These traits are projected onto others, onto leaders, and onto society, creating distorted perceptions that masquerade as reality. To reclaim critical thought, one must observe these projections, recognizing when our reactions are not responses to the world as it is, but to the parts of ourselves we refuse to integrate. When you feel anger or disdain at a collective opinion or social trend, pause. What is this reaction revealing about the part of me that I am denying? Another essential practice is dialectical thinking, the ability to hold opposing ideas in tension and explore them fully without rushing to judgment. In modern discourse, everything is reduced to binaries: right or wrong, friend or enemy, truth or fake. Jungian thought teaches us that reality is infinitely more nuanced. To cultivate this perspective, actively seek out opposing views, not to attack them, but to understand them. Observe the discomfort that arises when your beliefs are challenged, and let it guide you towards self-examination rather than defensiveness. The courage to entertain uncertainty is a hallmark of both individuation and critical thought. Journaling is a practical tool that brings these insights into tangible form. Writing allows the mind to slow down, to clarify, and to externalize what is often hidden. Daily journaling of thoughts, reactions, and doubts is an exercise in self-dialogue, in listening to the unconscious whispering beneath surface awareness. In these pages, you confront contradictions, recognize patterns of projection, and discover the moments when your thinking has been hijacked by habit, fear, or social influence. Over time, this practice strengthens the mind's capacity to distinguish between the reflexive and the deliberate, the inherited and the examined. Equally transformative is the cultivation of solitude. Jung famously said, "Solitude is necessary to discover the self." In quiet, unhurried moments, away from the noise of screens and crowds, the mind can perceive the contours of its own landscape. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the laboratory of thought, the arena in which ideas are tested, assumptions questioned, and the self confronted with the reality of its own complexity. In this space, reflection, shadow work, and metacognition converge, nurturing the ability to think independently. And critically active questioning must also become a habit. Do not accept statements, trends, or narratives at face value, regardless of how popular or authoritative they seem. Ask, who benefits from this belief being propagated? What assumptions underlie this claim? What evidence is missing, ignored, or suppressed? To ask these questions is not cynicism. It is the discipline of discernment, the courage to resist passive acceptance, and the commitment to intellectual integrity. Each question strengthens the mind against manipulation, against projection, and against the unconscious currents that would shape perception without consent. Critical thinking in the Jungian sense is inseparable from ethical awareness. As one becomes more conscious of their inner world, the responsibility to act wisely grows. Reflexive reactions, impulsive judgments, and unexamined assumptions are no longer acceptable because the individual now recognizes their complicity in shaping reality. Thought is no longer abstract. It is a practice with moral and spiritual consequences. By thinking deeply, by integrating shadow, and by questioning assumptions, one becomes a steward not only of their mind, but of their influence on the collective. Integration of the unconscious is supported by ritual and symbolic engagement. Jung emphasized that myths, archetypes, and symbols are not mere stories. They are mirrors of the psyche, guides through the complexity of inner life. Engage with these symbols consciously. Literature, art, and personal dreams become tools to uncover unconscious motivations and illuminate hidden patterns. By interpreting symbols, we learn to navigate not only our own minds, but also the social currents that shape collective thought. This symbolic literacy is essential for understanding how society manipulates, projects, and influences perception. Finally, the cultivation of patience is critical. Thinking deeply, confronting the shadow, and questioning assumptions is slow work. In a culture obsessed with immediacy, this slowness is revolutionary. Allow yourself the discomfort of uncertainty. Accept that answers may be partial, evolving, and sometimes elusive. The journey toward independent, critical thought is not about certainty, but about continuous engagement, about the willingness to wrestle with complexity instead of settling. For simplicity, through reflection, shadow work, dialectical thinking, journaling, solitude, active questioning, symbolic engagement, and patience, the mind gradually emerges from passivity. It becomes capable of resisting manipulation, of perceiving truth in its nuance, and of maintaining clarity in a storm of distraction. This is not merely a cognitive exercise. It is the act of reclaiming the self, of affirming one's autonomy, and of participating consciously in the shaping of reality. The path of Jungian critical thinking is demanding, but it is also liberating. Every moment spent examining thought, confronting fear, and integrating shadow is a victory over collective inertia. Every insight gained is a spark in the darkness of mass distraction, and each step toward awareness strengthens the individual against the currents that seek to flatten perception, simplify morality, and suppress the soul's capacity for reflection. In this journey, know that you are not alone. Across history and across cultures, those who have cultivated awareness, integrated shadow, and questioned assumptions have shaped the course of humanity. From philosophers to scientists, from mystics to revolutionaries, the act of thinking critically, deliberately, and independently has always been the spark of change. By choosing this path, you align yourself with a tradition of courage, wisdom, and conscious living. And so the challenge is clear. Begin today. Observe your thoughts, confront your projections, embrace uncertainty, and reflect with intention. Each small act is a rebellion against passivity, a step toward individuation, and a restoration of the power to think freely. In the next segment, we will explore how to navigate social and cultural pressures, defend our minds from external manipulation, and create environments that nourish reflection, dialogue, and the growth of conscious thought. Every small act is a rebellion against passivity, a step toward individuation and the restoration of the power to think freely. If you're ready to take on this responsibility, share your reflections in the comments, telling us how you've been facing your own projections and questions. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and share this video with those who also wish to awaken to a more conscious way of living. Every dialogue initiated is a step toward a freer mind and a more lucid world.